So far, we learned in this the course about ways to program in Python, and so far you learned the way of doing programming in a procedural way. That means you keep writing the code from top of the file to bottom, and using if name is equal to main, the functions keep getting called. Okay, and that is a way of procedure. So there is a procedure way of doing it. Okay, now we also learned about uh, you know data structures like lists, and you learned about dictionaries, right? So they are data structures, the primitive data structures that the Python provides. And suppose there are use cases where you want to store some kind of person details, like a person has got a name and an age. Okay, so I can let me choose a data type from the data structures that we learned, right? So suppose I have a list, right? Suppose I have a list here. Uh, I can say name is Python and the age is like 25 years, and I'm going to store that in a variable called person. Okay. Now, how would you know which location is a name and which location is age, right? So there is a confusion on how to use this, right? You could also use a dictionary, right? Here you could say name is Python, right? And age is like 25, and you could store this as a variable person to equal to, and you could say this is a dictionary, right? So now we can basically do person to dot uh, name. Can I get data like this? So you cannot get it. So the only way that you can get from a dictionary way of accessing is basically a name like this to get the name of the person. But what if you want to store like 1,000 person information? So again, you have to put this dictionary in a list, and you never know, uh, you know, as the number of people increase, so your list size will also increase. So what happened is that uh, we can create our own data structure where we can have thousands of persons, and thousands of persons are like the instances of the person, right? So we can create as many persons as we want, and we can define what this person should have, the name, age, and we can also define what kind of operations that this particular person can do, like walk, talk, right? The way similar to the way that we understood about lists, right? So in the list we are able to append, we are able to the insert, remove, all that thing operations we can also specify in a for this new data structure. So a way to create a new data structure in Python is using a concept called object oriented programming. Okay, so if you want to create your new data structure, you create a new class. Okay, so a new class, uh, the object oriented paradigm itself in programming says that if you want to put together what are the properties of that particular data structure, and what are the actions that can be done, if you combine together, it becomes a class in object oriented programming. Let me show you an example so that you understand. Okay, so the way to create a simple object, simple data structure, a new data structure, is using a keyword called class, and you would say I have a class called employee, and I will not do anything in this. Okay, so what does this mean is I am defining a new data structure similar to a list or a dictionary. I am defining a new data structure, yeah, but I have not added anything inside the data structure so far. So let me show you something interesting. Let me go to this and say help of list. Okay, directly. So what is the list that we've used so far? A list, if you observe here, it is a class. So everything in Python from the ground up is a class definition. So when you create a new list, it becomes an instance of this list. That means this particular class is defining what are the functionalities that are available in a list. For example, uh, append, delete, and all that. They are called methods. You already know what are functions, right? So functions and methods mean the same thing. So a list has got many methods in them. So you are creating number of lists. That means you are creating instances of the list. So similar to the list, I am creating my own data type here. What is the data type here? The employee. Now, what is a class? Class is a basically a blueprint, okay, which contains attributes. I can call it a data and related behaviors. Okay, related behaviors. So very simple. Okay, there is a class called employee. I can also create a class called dog. Okay, so I can create any number of classes. It is just like a blueprint. So when you create a class, it doesn't mean anything until you actually you create a instances of it. Okay, similar to the function, you just define it. Unless until you use it, it doesn't make any sense. Okay. So for this employee, as I said, class is a blueprint which contains attribute. Let's see what are the different attributes we have. For an employee, if you see the attributes for now, we can assume the name and the age and the salary, right? So some of these three properties are there. Now, what all operations can be done on an can employee do? An employee basically can log in, log out, right? And he can also print his data, print employee information, right? So all this can be basic operations of that employee can do. Now let's put together both the employee and the properties as well as the functionalities that the employee can do. Okay. Now in programming, this is called encapsulation. Like you are combining together both data and its related functionality. Now how to do it? Okay. Um, in Python. Okay, so when you create a new employee, right? When a new employee joins a company, his all details would be taken and it would be stored somewhere, right? So that is in the programming term we call it as a initialization. Okay. For any of the employee you want to create, the initialization has to be there. It's not mandatory, right? But sometimes you need the initialization. Uh, so for that matter, we use something known as uh, init functionality. Okay. Um, in this is the by default, this is the case. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a double underscore init double underscore the dunder init function, the def you see here. Okay. And it takes one argument right now as self. I will tell you what is that self. Okay. Now, as I said above, it takes three things. One is name, age, and salary. So let's write here name, age, and salary. And I will just write some code. Don't worry about it now. I will tell you what is that. Self dot age is equal to age. Self dot salary is equal to salary. Okay. I will remove this pass for now. Now, actually, we have created a class. We have added some properties to it, but actually we have not added any functionalities to it. Okay, so before I tell you what does all this mean, okay, we will basically create a employee from this. Okay, how to actually create a employee? Now the way you created list was x is equal to, you did a square bracket and uh, you did x is equal to this. Okay. Now, similar to this, you are passing some uh, values to this x, and this is a list. Similar to that, what I will do is I will say employee1 is equal to the class name, and you pass in the bracket whatever the additional things apart from self, whatever addition things are mentioned here, it should be passed. So for example, I will say employee1 is this, the age is like 22, and the salary is 10%. Okay. So now let me print both employee and let me print type of employee1, and let me also print employee1, and let me show you output of this. So let me go to oops and Python intro.py. Okay. Okay. Now one thing to observe here, I just printed the class. It is saying that this is of type class. Okay. If you see type of an employee object, this is of a type called employee. So similarly, the way you did the type of a list, right? So it gave you, say, just a minute. So type of, say, I will define an x is equal to empty list, and I will say type of x. If you observe here, it is a class list, right? Similar to that, we have here output as the type of employee1 as a basically employee type. Now, when I printed employee1 rather than type of employee or the class name, it gave you a memory location. So when you printed a class, it is not giving you a memory location, but you are actually, when you are giving the object, it is giving you basically a the memory location. Okay. So this is called an object. Employee1 is an object, employee is a class. Employee object has got a memory location, employee class does not have a memory location. Okay. So that's the difference between a class and an object. And I create employee2 now again. I can create, as I said, the advantage is I can create any number of employees. So I will say employee2 and 22 and say 12,000, right? Now, when employee1 wants to access its values, okay, employee1 wants to access his values, I can directly say employee1.age. I can say print employee1 age, right? I'm just writing some code here, dot format employee1 dot age, right? So similar to that, I will print employee2 dot age. So what should be the output here? Let me print it. So it says employee age, employee1 age is 22, and employee2 age is also 22. Okay. Now something interesting happened here. Now when I say employee1 dot age, right? All right. Now any questions so far here? The meaning of self. All right. So we created two employees here, right? So for each of these employees, we are passing these attributes. These are called attributes. Okay. So let me give you a comment here. Let me give you a comment here. So attributes or data, you can call whatever you want, right? So these values are common for all the objects. that you create. Okay, these are common for all the objects that you create. I mean, they are very specific to the objects that you create. So in this case, they are called instance variables, right? The instance data, the instance attribute, whatever you want to call, right? So these are very specific to the instance of the class. For example, every employee will have name, age, and salary. Okay, but there should be something, right, that is very common to all the employees. For example, the location, right? The location might not be common. Say the company name, right? For example, company name is equal to Python. Okay, something like this, ABC. So here in this case, this is called a class attribute. So here we said instance attribute, and the above one we are saying the class attribute. The reason is this particular value is common to all the objects out there, right? So that is why we are calling it as class attribute. Note that this is not part of the initialization process, and you can directly access it using the class name directly, employee dot the company name. See, you don't have to create object for it. But if you want to access the age, you cannot just use the class name. So what happens if I do age? What happens if I do the age with the class name? See, it says the employee does not have an attribute called age, because the property belongs to every object that you create, but the company name, it printed ABC, it is called a class attribute because it belongs to all the objects, right? That is called a class attribute. Now, since you already defined now what is an instance attribute and what is a class attribute, now you also want to do some operations, right? So as I mentioned on the top, there is name, age, and salary. This is the data points of an employee, but the employee also want to log in, right? Employee also want to log out. Employee also want to print. So let's take an example of print. So def, okay. So I will use print or display, okay, display. So I will take self, so that when employee one says you display my information, at that time self should be pointing to the employee one. Okay, so what I will do is I will just print directly. Print, I will say name, I will add a placeholder, age, a placeholder, and a salary and a placeholder. I would say for math, I would say self dot name, self dot age, self dot salary, right? So now this is called an instance method. Okay, so you understood about instance attribute. Now it is called an instance method because this method belongs to this method belongs to specific object of the class. For example, now instead of printing all this, I would directly say employee one dot display. The way to call this is the method name and whatever arguments that you want to pass, similar to the function call. And you already seen this, like list dot append, right? Dictionary dot update. So these are all the similar way that we are trying to do. Now employee one dot display. So let's see the output. What happens now? Okay. See, now it is printing name is employee one, age is 22, salary is 10,000. But employee two dot display. See, I'm reusing my code. I'm modularizing code. Once I have written code, I'm able to reuse it again and again. Now employee two dot display will print employee two, age 22, and salary 12,000. So it is very interesting, right? Because once you defined it, you're trying to reuse it here again and again, right? This is called an instance method. Okay. Sometimes you have a function like display company. Okay, so what you want to do is uh, you want to print you want to print the company name, right? Even though it is accessible outside, but I want to have a specific method for it. Okay, so similar to a class attribute, you can also have a specific method which is common to all the objects. Okay, for example, this function, okay, takes the first argument as class and just prints class dot company name. Okay, and I'm going to give something interesting here that I will tell you what this is. Okay, now say when I say uh, employee one dot display company, right? Similarly, employee two dot display company. What happens? So let us see the output here. So it prints ABC, ABC, right? So both of the instances are able to access it. Okay, and the class, the variable, the instead of self here. So when it is an instance method, we passed self as an argument. The instance method is a method which is very specific to an object. But when you want to have a common method, it is called a class method. And we are just making that, telling to Python that whatever functions that I have written here, it is belonging to all the instances, all the objects of this class. And the only difference here is it takes CLS. It can be any variable, okay? But in Python, there are some general rules that people follow. CLS is the argument, the first argument that it takes, okay, similar to self. And whatever class attributes are there, you can actually access them using CLS dot. Okay, so the difference between instance method and a class method is instance method belongs to a single object, whereas class method belongs to all the objects that you create. Now, any questions before I go forward? Okay, so let me add one more function. I would say def, uh, I would say raise salary, and so I want to raise the salary of the employee, right? So I can say self dot salary is equal to self dot salary plus amount. I can also make a shortcut out of it. I can directly say plus equal to amount, right? So I'm raising the salary of an employee because he got a promotion, right? So this is a function which takes the argument, which is called a positional argument that we learned. So how do we use that functionality? Okay, how do we use that functionality? Employee one dot, I want to raise the salary of the first employee by 2000 rupees, and similarly I want to raise the salary of second employee by 5000 rupees, and basically you want to print. How do you print? Display not company, I want to do just display employee 2 dot display. See, let me see the output now. What should be the output here? So it is uh, I am raising the salary. The initial salary was 10,000 and now it became 17,000, like 12,000, and the for second employee it became from 12,000 to 17,000, as you can see in the, right? So this is how you create a class. Okay, so these are called instance attribute, class attribute, instance method, and the class method. Any question so far? So the init method is called the initializer method. Okay, and the class attributes, as you know, it's a very common uh, thing for all the objects. Okay, now
Pavan,
interest. Yeah.
I have a question. You said class objects can be accessed by any. Sorry, class method can be accessed by any object, and instance can is very particular to one object, right?
Yeah,
Is that right, what
this
I
is
said?
common to all the objects. Okay. Now this is, for example, you want to perform operation on a specific employee. Here you're not
Mm.
performing any operations on the specific employee, right? You just want to use the common things that is across the employees. But here what you're trying to do is, here you're trying to work with the individual employee. For example, you want to print individuals information. Here you want to increase individual salary. So wherever
Mm.
individuality is there, that is instance method.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
So now what I will do is, so I will say from my intro module, I'm going to import a class called employee. Okay. And right now it is printing everything because I don't have if name is equal to main. That is why it is printing. But something that you need to note, if I do dir of employee, that's we are very used to this particular command. Now you need to see something interesting. So you know now that there is an attribute called company name, right? There is a function called display. There is a function called display company. There is also a function called raise salary. Okay. So these are already coming as part of your dir. So assume now you did dir of list. You also got the same way, right? There is no difference between what you learned there and what you learned here. And it works the same way. Help, if you say employee dot raise underscore salary, what happens here? So it gives you a definition of raise salary and self comma amount, right? Now, if you would have written some kind of documentation here, this would have come here. Okay. So that's the magic. So you created your own data structure now. So you can perform same operations like you did on list here. But there is some interesting things that you can do. I will show you with the time. Okay. Now there is also one more type of method, okay, which does not take any argument, okay, which does not take any argument. And philosophically speaking, this is a method which generally does not do anything related to the class. For example, employee, suppose uh, uh, I can say I can take any function that is not very specific to employee. Okay, that is called a static method. Okay, for example, I will say def some method. I'm not going to give it a name. I can remove self. Okay, now I removed self. It's not going to take any argument. Okay, uh, I'm going to call it static method. Okay, and I'm going to just give an example, print some static method. So a method, philosophically speaking, does something which does not belong to class employee. Means that some operation which is not actually employee related but it is required, that is called a static method. Okay, whereas class method, it is doing something that is related to employee class. For example, display company, it is related to employee class and it is very common to all the objects. So that is called a class method. But here it is also a common functionality, but philosophically speaking, it is doing something that is good, but it is not actually employee related. Okay. So that is called a static method. Similar to class method, I can directly call employee one dot. Let's see whether I can call this particular functionality, this employee one dot sum method. Let me run this. So it is getting called from all the objects. You can also call it from, can I call it from the class name as well? See, you are able to class from, you are able to call from the class as well. So this is the difference between instance method, a class method, and a static method. Okay. Now there are a lot of advantages of object oriented Python. Okay. So object oriented Python helps you organize your code much better. You can actually give a real meaning. For example, a car can make a accelerate, decelerate, right? You can do a lot more operations on top of that object. So it connects the real world objects into programming. Okay, so this has been there for a very long time now, and a lot of frameworks that are developed using OOPS itself. So if you see, let me show you if I get something here. Where do I have something? MySQL connector. Let's go to authentication.py. Okay, so this is a MySQL library. If you see, it's everything is a class. There is a class called base auth plugin. There is an init method. Now, by this you understand, right? It takes in the MySQL command takes the authentication as username and password and database, right? So this code is the init method. By now you'd understood. You want to create an instance of MySQL object in your code, and it takes these as the basically arguments, right? And similarly, this is called an instance method, right? Because we understood wherever there is a self and which is specific to the respective uh, object, so it is called a instance method. Let us see if I have any class method and show you. See, so many classes. So wherever you go, there are a lot of classes. So let's see, person.py or whatever connection.py. So there is a connection class here. See here, so many methods here, and you observe something like underscore, right? I will tell what does it mean. Okay. So in all the programming language, object-oriented programming is very common, like Java or C Sharp or something. And there are specific, the hiding capabilities that are there, like you have public attributes. We have attributes, right? So we have attributes here, name, age, and salary. Some of these attributes can be public. That means any object that you create can access that value, but sometimes you want to make them private. You don't want all the child objects also to basically access this. That is called a private, and you have a protected. Only inherited object should have these kind of permissions to access these values. So there is a permission kind of security that you want to add. But in Python there is no such thing, okay, where you have a protected and private. So that is why what people do is, as a convention, okay, as a convention, wherever you see a single underscore is a protected. So wherever you see a single underscore, let me show you here as an example in MySQL. Yeah, for example, send command. So here it is starting with the single underscore. That means the other developers as adults, okay, we need to understand that this method is going to be called only within the class or only the inherited class. I will talk about inheritance in the next session, but in this session, I'm going to tell you this is called a protected method. Okay. Whereas you also see sometimes double underscores for the methods. Okay. The double underscore methods, they are called private methods. Okay. So this is a good start to learn object-oriented programming. Now, in the next session, we learn about inheritance. We will learn about how to use object-oriented programming to make our the actual programming much more interesting. Okay. So any questions in this before we close?